The morning fog hung thick over Rechicourt-la-Petite on September 19, 1944. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper could barely see 30 feet ahead when his M18 Hellcat crested Hill 246. Then, through the grey soup, a shape emerged. The long barrel of a German Panther tank, 30 feet away, close enough to see the gun muzzle, close enough to die. Leiper's gunner, Sergeant Stacy, fired first. The 76mm round punched through the Panther's side armor before the German crew even knew the Americans were there. The 45-ton Panther exploded. A second Panther appeared from the tree line. Stacy fired again. Another kill. Then a third German tank materialized and got its shot off first, slamming into Stacy's Hellcat. But the 17-ton American machine didn't brew up. It didn't disintegrate. The crew scrambled out, wounded but alive, and their Hellcat limped back toward Aracourt under its own power. The Germans had sent their finest. Brand. New Panthers, fresh from the factory, with crews who believed their tanks were invincible. The Panthers had 3.1 inches of frontal armor angled at 55 degrees, effective thickness over 5 inches. They mounted 75mm guns that could kill any Allied tank at 2,000 yards. Hitler himself had called the Panther the best tank in the world. The Americans sent Hellcats, 17 tons of speed with armor so thin you could penetrate it with a .30 caliber rifle bullet at 75 yards. The turret was open-topped. The crew sat exposed to snipers, grenades, shell fragments. German intelligence officers looked at captured M18s and called them death traps. Suicide machines. The Americans, they said, must be desperate to field something so poorly protected. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. But here's what the German High Command didn't understand in September of 1944. Those paper-thin Hellcats could hit 55 miles per hour on roads. The Panthers struggled to reach 30. The Hellcat's turret rotated at 24 degrees per second. Early Panthers managed 6 degrees per second, later models up to 19 at full engine power. In the time a Panther needed to swing its gun 90 degrees to track a moving target, a Hellcat could complete almost a full circle. Speed wasn't a luxury for Hellcat crews. It was the weapon. And over the next 10 days at Aracourt, those supposedly inferior American machines would shred 2 German Panzer brigades, destroying over 80 Panthers while losing fewer than a dozen Hellcats. The kill ratio shocked everyone. The question German tank commanders kept asking was simple. How do you fight something you can't hit? How do you kill something that's already gone before you can aim? The answer was, you don't. And that realization would haunt German Panzer crews from France to Germany for the rest of the war. To understand what happened at Aracourt, you need to go back to December 1941, when the United States found itself fighting a war it wasn't prepared for. German Panzers were tearing through Soviet armies on the Eastern Front. In North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps was making American tanks look obsolete. The problem was brutally simple. American tanks couldn't kill German tanks, but German tanks could kill American tanks with ease. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce had a radical idea. Stop trying to build tanks that could slug it out toe-to-toe with German armor. That was a losing game. Instead, build something different. Something fast enough to choose when and where to fight. Something that could get behind the enemy's heavy armor and kill it from the flanks and rear. A hunter, not a fighter. Bruce's philosophy was revolutionary for 1941. Traditional doctrine said you needed thick armor to survive combat. You dug in. You held ground. You absorbed enemy fire and fired back. Bruce said that was backwards. The best armor, he argued, was not being where the enemy was shooting. Speed kills. Mobility survives. Get to the ambush position first. Shoot first. Leave before return fire arrives. The tank destroyer force was created with a simple motto: seek, strike, destroy. Find enemy armor. Race to an advantageous position. Kill it. Move before it kills you. Speed and firepower mattered. Armor didn't. This wasn't just radical thinking. It was heresy to traditional tank officers who'd spent their careers believing thick steel plates kept you alive. In January 1942, the Ordnance Corps issued requirements for a fast tank destroyer. They wanted the Christie suspension system, the Wright Continental R975 engine that powered Sherman tanks, and initially a 37mm gun. But as intelligence reports came back from North Africa showing German tank armor getting thicker, that 37mm wasn't going to cut it. The requirement changed to 57mm, then 75mm, finally settling on 76mm. Harley Earl's design studio at Buick took the contract. Yes, the same Buick that built cars for middle-class Americans. Earl, who would later become famous for designing Corvettes and Cadillacs with tail fins, applied automotive thinking to military problems. Keep it simple. Use off-the-shelf parts. Design for mass production. Make it maintainable by ordinary mechanics, not specialists. The engineering team faced a brutal constraint. The Army wanted a tank destroyer that could reach 45 to 55 miles per hour. That speed requirement meant weight had to stay under 18 tons. Every pound of armor was a pound that slowed you down. Every complex system was a system that could break. Buick's engineers weren't trying to build the ultimate tank destroyer. They were trying to build one that worked, that could be built in quantity, and that crews could actually use in combat. The engine choice was obvious. The Continental R975 radial engine already powered M4 Sherman tanks, 400 horsepower from 9 cylinders arranged in a radial pattern. The engine was air-cooled, reliable, and most importantly, already in mass production. Supply chains existed. Mechanics knew how to fix it. Using this engine saved months of development time and eliminated the biggest cost risk in aircraft or tank design, getting the power plant to work. In a 17-ton vehicle, 400 horsepower gave a power-to-weight ratio of 23 horsepower per ton. For comparison, modern sports cars have about 15 horsepower per ton. The Hellcat had more power to weight than a Porsche 911. That ratio meant acceleration like nothing German crews had ever seen from tracked armor. The suspension was equally pragmatic. Torsion bar suspension, simple and robust, using steel bars that twisted to absorb shock from terrain. This wasn't cutting-edge technology. It was proven technology that worked. The suspension could handle high speeds over rough ground without shaking the crew to pieces or braking constantly. The armor was where Buick made the controversial choice. The hull front got 1 inch of cast steel at a 23-degree angle. The sides got half an inch. The turret front was 1 inch thick. The sides and rear of the turret were half an inch. The hull floor was a 1/4 inch. These numbers were shocking. The M4 Sherman had 2 inches of frontal armor. The M10 tank destroyer had 1.5 inches. The M18's armor was thinner than an M8 armored car. Buick's chief engineer, William Schwendler, defended the decision in a memo dated April 1943. The purpose of a tank destroyer is not to absorb punishment, but to deliver it from positions where the enemy cannot return fire effectively. Armor thick enough to say ting, stop a 75mm shell at combat ranges, would add 12 tons to vehicle weight, reducing top speed to 30 miles per hour and eliminating our tactical advantage. We choose not to be hit rather than to survive being hit. This was gambling with men's lives, and everyone knew it. A single hit from a Panzer's 75mm gun would kill a Hellcat at any range. A hit from a Tiger's 88mm would vaporize it. Even machine gun fire could penetrate the turret sides at close range. Testing showed that 30-caliber armor-piercing bullets could punch through the turret at 75 yards. 9 out of 30 test rounds penetrated, but Schwendler's team did add armor where it mattered most, keeping the crew alive. A 3/8-inch steel plate sat behind the driver and assistant driver. Bulletproof glass protected the driver's vision slit. The armor wouldn't stop tank shells, but it would stop small arms fire and shell fragments, the things that killed crews even when their vehicles survived. The gun mount was deliberately simple. The 76mm M1A1 gun sat in an open-topped turret. Open-topped meant no roof. The crew sat exposed. Snipers could kill them, grenades could be thrown in, artillery airbursts would shred them, but the open top gave the crew 360-degree visibility and saved weight. In tank destroyer doctrine, seeing the enemy first mattered more than having a roof. The turret could rotate 360 degrees in 24 seconds, using an electro-hydraulic traverse mechanism. That's 15 degrees per second, faster than almost any other American armored vehicle and far faster than early model Panthers. The gun could depress 10 degrees and elevate 20 degrees, giving good firing angles on uneven terrain. Maximum firing rate was 20 rounds per minute, though in combat, exhausted crews firing as fast as possible rarely exceeded 12. Ammunition storage was practical rather than optimal. 45 rounds of 76mm ammunition, 9 rounds in the turret to the right of the gun, where the loader could grab them quickly. 18 rounds in each sponson, a 50 caliber Browning M2 heavy machine gun mounted on the turret's left rear in a flexible ring mount with 800 rounds. Every crew member got an M1 carbine with 90 rounds for self-defense, plus grenades and smoke pots. The layout reflected hard lessons from early tank destroyer prototypes. The driver sat front left, the assistant driver front right. Both had identical controls. Either could drive the vehicle. Only the driver's steering levers worked as parking brakes, but in combat, if the driver was killed, the assistant driver could take over immediately without switching seats. The commander, gunner, and loader sat in the turret. Commander left rear, gunner left front, loader right. All three had seats. The commander could stand on his seat to operate the 50 caliber machine gun. An SCR-610 radio sat in the turret rear. An escape hatch in the hull floor let crews bail out if the vehicle caught fire, though from a burning tank destroyer, you usually went out over the sides faster than through a floor hatch. Everything about the M18 screamed pragmatism over perfection. The instrument panel used off-the-shelf gauges shared with Army Air Force trainers. The radio was a standard Navy set, nothing custom. Ammunition boxes were standard military containers any armourer could reload in 20 minutes. Even the gun sights were simplified versions of more expensive precision optics. When Buick submitted cost estimates in September 1942, the total came to $55,000 per vehicle at production quantities of 100 units per month. Compare that to the M4 Sherman at $65,000 or the M10 tank destroyer at $62,000. The M18 was cheaper than the tank it was meant to protect, and it was a fraction of the cost of the German Panthers it would face, which consumed $300,000 worth of German resources per vehicle, equivalent to $4.5 million in today's money. Cost wasn't just about money, it was about how many you could build. America's industrial capacity could produce Hellcats at a rate German factories couldn't match. Every month Buick could pump out more M18s, meant more firepower on the battlefield. Quantity had a quality all its own. The first prototype, designated XF6F1, rolled out of Buick's Flint, Michigan plant on June 30, 1942. Test pilot Robert Hall took it up for trials on July 26. His report was deliberately understated. Vehicle performs to specification without significant deviations. No unexpected handling characteristics observed. In military procurement, boring is perfect. Boring means it works as predicted. But while Buick's engineers were building their Hunter in Michigan, German engineers at MAN, Daimler-Benz were building something very different. They were building what they believed was the ultimate tank, and they were about to learn that ultimate and effective aren't the same thing. The Panther tank represented everything German engineering could achieve when given unlimited ambition and limited time. In 1941 and 42, German tank crews on the Eastern Front ran into Soviet 34s with sloped armor that deflected German shells. The Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks that had crushed France in 1940 were suddenly obsolete. Hitler demanded an answer. Fast. MAN and Daimler-Benz competed for the contract. MAN won, partly because their design used an existing Rheinmetall-Borsig turret already in production. Daimler-Benz would have required designing a new turret and new engine, delaying production by months. Hitler wanted Panthers immediately. and man promised them. The design that emerged was impressive on paper: 45 tons of steel and machinery. A Maybach HL 230 engine producing 700 horsepower, though that engine had to push 45 tons, giving a power-to-weight ratio of just 15 horsepower per ton. Less than the Sherman, far less than the Hellcat. The armor was extraordinary. Frontal armor, 3.1 inches thick, angled at 55 degrees. The effective thickness exceeded 5 inches. Side armor was almost 2 inches. The whole tank was designed to deflect rather than absorb shells. Soviet 76mm guns bounced off the glacis plate. American 75mm guns were useless against it. Even the British 17-pounder struggled. The gun was equally impressive. A 75mm KBK-42 with a barrel length of 70 calibers. The barrel was 70 times longer than its bore diameter, giving extraordinary muzzle velocity. Armor-piercing rounds left the barrel at 3,250 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, this gun could penetrate 5.5 inches of flat armor. Point blank, almost 7 inches. This weapon could kill any Allied tank from the front at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. German crews could sit on a ridgeline and destroy Shermans and Hellcats before the Americans even got close enough to shoot back effectively. Hitler called it the best tank in the world. German propaganda films showed Panthers crushing through forests and smashing bunkers. The message was clear. Germany still had technological superiority. These machines would turn the tide. But the Panther had problems that no amount of propaganda could hide. The design had been intended for a 30-ton tank. Hitler kept demanding more armor, more protection, more capability. The weight climbed to 45 tons, but nobody redesigned the final drive, the gear system connecting the engine to the tracks. The final drive was the Panther's Achilles heel. Under combat conditions, the average Panther final drive lasted about 150 kilometers before failing catastrophically. That's 93 miles. American mechanics who examined captured Panthers couldn't believe it. They found final drive gears worn smooth, teeth stripped, bearings destroyed. The Hellcat's drive system routinely went thousands of miles between overhauls. The Maybach engine caused constant headaches. 700 horsepower sounds impressive until you realize that engine was running at the absolute limit of its design capacity just to move the tank. The aluminum engine blocks cracked under stress. The fuel injection system clogged. The cooling system overheated in summer and froze in winter. Maintenance manuals specified that crews needed to warm up the engine for at least 30 minutes before moving in cold weather. 30 minutes sitting in one spot making noise while you waited for your tank to be ready. In combat, that announces your position to every enemy within miles. Then there were those beautifully engineered, interleaved road wheels. Overlapping wheels on each side gave a smooth ride and better weight distribution. Brilliant in theory, disastrous in practice. Mud and snow packed between the wheels and froze solid overnight on the Eastern Front. Crews woke up to find their 45-ton tank completely immobilized. The only solution was lighting fires under the wheels to melt the ice, a process that took hours and created smoke visible for miles. If one road wheel broke, you had to remove half the wheels on that side to replace it. A repair that took 30 minutes on a Sherman took 6 hours on a Panther. And replacement parts were increasingly scarce as Allied bombing destroyed German factories and supply lines. The transmission was another nightmare. 7 forward gears required constant adjustment and maintenance. The synchromesh system, supposed to make gear changes smooth, failed regularly under combat stress. Drivers reported that shifting gears while moving required perfect timing and often resulted in grinding metal and broken teeth. Replacement transmissions were in such short supply that German units sometimes cannibalized 3 broken Panthers to build one working tank. German records from 1944 show that Panzer divisions reported an average operational readiness rate of 42% for their Panthers. Read that again. On any given day, less than half their Panthers were actually ready to fight. The rest were broken down, waiting for parts, waiting for repairs, or being stripped for spare parts to keep others running. The turret traverse system demonstrated the same problem. Early Panthers used a hydraulic system limited to 6 degrees per second. That's 60 seconds for a full rotation, an absolute eternity in combat. Later models got a variable speed system that could hit 19 degrees per second at 2,000 engine RPM and over 36 degrees per second at maximum engine speed. But those speeds required the main engine, running at high RPMs, burning fuel and making noise. At low engine speed, turret traverse could take 90 seconds for a full rotation. Compare that to the Hellcat's 24 degrees per second. In the time a Panther at low engine RPM turned its turret 90 degrees, a Hellcat could spin almost a complete circle. When you're racing around a battlefield at 55 miles per hour and your enemy is trying to track you, that rotation speed becomes the difference between living and dying. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Panther's operational cost wasn't just measured in money or mechanical failures. It was measured in time to repair, time to maintain, time waiting for parts that never arrived. German maintenance crews spent more hours fixing Panthers than Panther crews spent fighting in them. When the 5th Panzer Army launched its counterattack toward Arcourt in September 1944, they assembled 262 tanks and assault guns. 120 were brand new Panthers. But 41 Panthers broke down before they even made contact with American forces, not from enemy fire, from mechanical failures. Transmissions failed, final drives stripped, engines overheated. By the time the Germans reached the battlefield, they'd lost 1/3 of their Panther force to their own machines. The American 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, by contrast, maintained an operational readiness rate above 85% throughout September 1944. When a Hellcat broke down, which was rare, the crew could often fix it themselves with basic tools. The radial engine was simple, reliable, and shared parts with aircraft engines, meaning spare parts were everywhere. The suspension rarely failed. The transmission was basically a heavy-duty truck transmission, easy to maintain and repair. This wasn't about German engineers being incompetent. They were brilliant. The Panther was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was over-engineered for its purpose. Every system was pushed to its technical limit. Every component was precisely manufactured to tight tolerances. When everything worked perfectly, the Panther was devastating. But in combat, nothing works perfectly. Equipment breaks, tolerances shift, and when a Panther broke, it often stayed broken. The fundamental difference between the Panther and the Hellcat was philosophical. German engineers tried to build the perfect tank. American engineers tried to build a tank that worked. German doctrine emphasized protection and firepower. American doctrine emphasized speed and tactical flexibility. German industry focused on quality over quantity. American industry focused on quantity with adequate quality. Both sides believed their approach was correct. Both sides had good reasons for their choices. And both approaches were about to collide at Arcourt in a way that would prove which philosophy worked better when young men's lives were on the line. Because in September 1944, those brand new Panthers rolling toward Arcourt represented the pinnacle of German tank design. They were supposed to be invincible. They had the armor. They had the gun. They had experienced crews who'd been told they were driving the best tanks in the world. What they didn't have was an answer for an enemy that refused to fight on German terms. An enemy that appeared out of fog at ranges where armor didn't matter. An enemy that fired 3 shots and disappeared before German gunners could even locate the muzzle flash. An enemy that could be killed by any German gun but couldn't be caught. The Germans were about to discover that in modern warfare, the tank that shoots first usually wins. And the tank that shoots first is usually the tank that got into position first. Speed, it turned out, wasn't just a nice-to-have feature. Speed was the ultimate weapon system, and the Americans had built a machine that could turn speed into killing power in ways German doctrine had never anticipated. The Battle of Arcourt was about to become a very harsh lesson in the difference between engineering excellence and combat effectiveness. And for German tank crews who'd spent months training in their supposedly superior Panthers, that lesson was going to be written in fire and blood on the rolling hills of eastern France. The rain started on September 18th, 1944. Not the gentle autumn drizzle that farmers prayed for, but cold sheets of water that turned the roads around Aracourt into rivers of mud and reduced visibility to 100 yards on a good day. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, sat in his command Sherman and watched the weather turn his defensive position into a nightmare. In this soup, German tanks could get close before anyone saw them coming. And close range. Combat meant American numerical superiority wouldn't matter. It would be tank against tank, gun against gun, armor against armor. The kind of fight Americans usually lost. But Abrams had a secret weapon. Or rather, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had 54 of them, spread across 3 companies positioned in the hills around Aracourt, M18 Hellcats, and their commander, Lieutenant Colonel George Rubresh, had been waiting for exactly this kind of weather. Poor visibility didn't bother Hellcat crews. They weren't planning to sit on defensive positions and trade shots with Panthers. They were planning to hunt. The German plan was straightforward and brutally simple. The 5th Panzer Army would punch through the thin American defensive line at Aracourt, race west to the Moselle River, cut off Patton's Third Army from its supply lines, and trap hundreds of thousands of American troops against the German border. It was ambitious, it was desperate, and if it worked, it could delay the Allied advance into Germany by months, maybe derail it entirely. General Hans von Manteuffel commanded the attack. He had 262 tanks and assault guns, including 120 brand-new Panther Ausf Gs, fresh from German factories. These weren't the hastily built Panthers with undertrained crews that had been fed into the meat grinder in Normandy. These were properly manufactured machines with experienced crews transferred from training battalions. Von Manteuffel told his officers they were getting the finest tanks Germany could build. The subtext was clear. Don't fail with these. The 111th Panzer Brigade and 113th Panzer Brigade formed the spearhead. Each brigade had roughly 60 Panthers, plus supporting infantry and artillery. German reconnaissance reported that the Americans had maybe 200 Shermans in the area, spread thin across defensive positions. Von Manteuffel's intelligence officers estimated the Americans could concentrate perhaps 70 tanks against the main German thrust. The math looked good. Even accounting for American air superiority, which the weather had grounded, the Germans had better tanks and better training. This should work. What von Manteuffel's intelligence didn't know was that Abrams and Rubresh had been preparing for this exact scenario for 3 weeks. They'd war-gamed German counterattack routes. They'd identified every possible avenue of approach. They'd pre-positioned Hellcats on high ground, overlooking those approaches, with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. The Hellcats weren't there to hold ground. They were there to ambush, kill, and vanish before the Germans could respond. The first contact came at 06:30 on September 19th, on Hill 318, 3 miles northeast of Aracourt. A platoon of Hellcats from C Company, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, sat in hull-down positions along a tree line. The gunners could see maybe 200 yards through the morning fog. Then, through the grey, shapes began to emerge. Panthers, lots of them. The Germans were advancing in column formation, nose to tail, because the muddy roads wouldn't support vehicles driving off-road. They were bunched up, exposed, perfect targets. Staff Sergeant Walter Parks commanded the lead Hellcat. He waited until the first Panther was 150 yards away, close enough that even in the fog his gunner couldn't miss. The rule with Panthers was simple. Don't shoot at the front. The glacis plate would bounce your 76mm round into the next county. Shoot the sides, shoot the rear. Shoot the turret ring where the turret meets the hull. Those were the kill zones. The German column presented perfect side shots. Park's gunner, Corporal James Henderson, put the first round through the lead Panther's side armour at the ammunition storage point. The Panther exploded, flames shooting 30 feet into the air. Before the German crews in the following tanks even understood what was happening, Henderson fired again. Another Panther erupted. A third shot. A third kill. 4 seconds between shots. 12 seconds. Total elapsed time from first shot to third kill. The German column went into chaos. Panthers tried to swing their turrets to engage the Americans, but they couldn't see through the fog and smoke where the shots were coming from. Some tried to back up, colliding with tanks behind them. Others attempted to leave the road, only to sink immediately into the mud, their 45-ton weight bogging them down axle deep. Henderson fired 2 more rounds. 2 more Panthers were destroyed. 5 kills in 30 seconds. Then Parks's driver, Private First Class Robert Whitmore, threw the Hellcat into reverse, and they backed down the hill at 30 miles per hour. By the time German gunners finally spotted the muzzle flash location and started dropping shells on that tree line, the Hellcat was 400 yards away and accelerating toward its secondary fighting position 2 miles south. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. And it was happening simultaneously at 5 different locations around Aracourt as other Hellcat platoons found German columns advancing through the fog and tore into them from ambush positions. The Germans couldn't fight what they couldn't see, and by the time they saw the Hellcats, those Hellcats were already leaving. By noon on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade had lost 17 Panthers without destroying a single American tank destroyer. The brigade commander, Colonel Gerhard Teber, sent an increasingly frantic series of radio messages to division headquarters. "We are under attack by fast-moving American tank destroyers. Request air support. Request artillery support. Enemy vehicles appear, fire, and disappear before we can return fire. Casualties mounting. Division had no air support to give. The Luftwaffe barely existed in France by September 1944. Artillery support was limited because American counter-battery fire destroyed any German guns that revealed their positions. Tebe was on his own. And his Panthers were dying. The weather cleared slightly that afternoon, giving German gunners better visibility. That should have helped. Instead, it made things worse, because now the Germans could see how fast the Hellcats were moving. Panther crews reported enemy tank destroyers racing across open ground at speeds that seemed impossible for tracked vehicles. German training had taught them that tanks moved at 15 to 25 miles per hour in combat. American tank destroyers were doing 50. Lieutenant Hans Weber commanded a Panther in the 111th Panzer Brigade's 2nd Company. His account, recorded after the war, captures the German confusion. "We saw an American tank destroyer moving left to right across our front at perhaps 1,000 meters. I ordered our gunner to track and fire. But by the time our turret traversed to the target, the American vehicle was gone, hidden behind a building or a tree line. Then it would appear somewhere else, fire, and disappear again. We fired 8 rounds and never hit it. The vehicle moved faster than our turret could track. How do you fight something like that?" The answer was that you don't, not effectively. The Panthers had superior armor and superior guns, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to engage on terms where armor and firepower mattered. The Hellcats were fighting from ambush, taking side shots, and evaporating before German guns could bear on them. The Panthers' advantages meant nothing if they couldn't hit their targets. By evening on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade had penetrated 3 miles into American positions, but had lost 27 Panthers in the process. They'd destroyed 12 American tanks, a mix of Shermans and light tanks, but only 2 Hellcats. The exchange ratio was unsustainable. At this rate, the brigade would cease to exist, as a fighting force within 72 hours. September 20th brought worse news for the Germans. The weather cleared completely, and American fighter bombers appeared overhead like angry hornets. P-47 Thunderbolts, carrying 500-pound bombs and rockets. The Panthers, painted in dark grey camouflage that had worked well in France's forests, stood out against the autumn fields like beetles on a white tablecloth. American pilots dove on German columns, and Panthers that had survived Hellcat ambushes got torn apart by bombs and rockets. But even with air support hammering the Germans, the Hellcats kept hunting. Because American doctrine was clear: tank destroyers seek enemy armor. They don't wait for it to come to them. They go find it and kill it. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion sent platoons ranging miles ahead of American lines, searching for German assembly areas and supply columns. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, whose morning encounter had opened the battle, spent September 20th prowling the roads north of Rechicourt with his platoon of 4 Hellcats. They found a German supply column at 1400 hours, 6 trucks, 2 half-tracks, and 3 Panthers providing security. The Panthers were facing outward, watching for threats from the flanks. Nobody was watching the rear. Leiper's platoon approached from behind at 45 miles per hour, the roar of their engines masked by the noise of German vehicles. At 200 yards, all 4 Hellcats opened fire simultaneously. 3 Panthers died in the first salvo. The German infantry scattered. The trucks started burning. Leiper's platoon put 14 rounds downrange in 30 seconds, destroyed everything with armor, and vanished back down the road before German artillery could respond to the frantic radio calls from the convoy. This was the nightmare scenario German commanders had feared since the Hellcats' specifications first appeared in intelligence reports. Fast tank destroyers operating aggressively behind German lines, killing supply vehicles and isolated tank platoons, then disappearing before a coherent response could be organized. The front line wasn't a line anymore. It was a fluid zone where American tank destroyers appeared anywhere, anytime. The 111th Panzer Brigade tried adapting German tactics. They split their Panthers into smaller groups and used reconnaissance vehicles to scout ahead. They positioned anti-tank guns to cover likely ambush sites. They even tried using Panthers as bait, parking them in the open, while other Panthers sat hidden nearby, waiting for American tank destroyers to attack the bait. It didn't work. Hellcat commanders weren't stupid. When they saw a lone Panther sitting in an obvious position, they assumed it was a trap and went looking for different targets. And when German anti-tank guns engaged Hellcats, those Hellcats simply withdrew at speeds the Germans couldn't match. You can't chase something doing 55 miles per hour when your top speed is 30. By September 22nd, the 5th Panzer Army's offensive had completely stalled. The 113th Panzer Brigade reported 43 Panthers destroyed or disabled. The 111th Panzer Brigade reported 39 Panthers lost. Together, they'd killed maybe 30 American tanks and 6 Hellcats. The exchange ratio wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. German tank production couldn't replace Panthers at this rate. Even if factories worked 24 hours a day, which they did, Allied bombing kept destroying the factories. Von Manteuffel requested permission to withdraw and regroup. Berlin refused. Hitler himself had ordered this offensive. It would continue until the Americans were thrown back across the Moselle, or until the Panzer brigades ceased to exist. Those were the only 2 acceptable outcomes. So the Germans kept attacking, and the Hellcats kept killing them. September 23rd through 29th saw a grinding battle where German Panthers tried to break through American positions by sheer weight of numbers, and American tank destroyers systematically destroyed them. Hellcat platoons set up rotating ambush positions. As soon as one platoon fired and withdrew, another platoon was already in position 2 miles away, waiting for the German column to stumble into the next kill zone. German after-action reports from this period make for grim reading. Enemy tank destroyers operated in groups of 4 to 6 vehicles. They engaged from ranges of 200 to 500 meters, fired 3 to 5 rounds, then withdrew at high speed before our guns could traverse. Attempts to pursue were unsuccessful due to superior enemy vehicle speed. Losses mounting. Morale is declining. That last line tells you everything. German tank crews had spent months being told their Panthers were invincible. Now they were watching those Panthers get carved up by American vehicles with armor so thin you could punch through it with a rifle bullet. The psychological impact was devastating. If Panthers weren't safe, what was? The battle officially ended on September 29th, when the 5th Panzer Army withdrew its surviving forces back across the German border. Of the 120 Panthers that had started the offensive, 86 were destroyed or abandoned. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had lost 7 Hellcats in combat and 2 more to mechanical failures. 7 losses versus 86 kills. That's a 12-to-1 exchange ratio. Historians argue about why Aracourt turned into such a lopsided American victory. Some credit American air superiority. Some point to German supply problems and mechanical breakdowns. Some emphasize that German troops were exhausted and American troops were fresh. All of those factors mattered. But the men who were actually there, both American and German, agree on one thing: the Hellcat made the difference. Not because it had better armor or a better gun than the Panther. It didn't. The Panther was superior in both categories. The Hellcat won because it fought on its own terms, using speed and mobility to choose when and where to engage, always attacking from positions where German advantages didn't matter. The Germans had built tanks designed to win in stand-up fights. The Americans had built tank destroyers designed to never get into stand-up fights in the first place. And at Aracourt, those two philosophies collided with brutal finality. Speed killed, mobility survived. The paper-thin Hellcats proved that not being where the enemy shoots is better armor than any steel plate. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.